At only $15, Forgive Me Father is a steal for the current amount of content and the promise of more to come. Despite my issues with the control and the lack of a walking speed, I had a lot of fun with this game and I was fully absorbed throughout my playtime. Bite Barrel really delivers on the promise of retro shooter goodness, and there's honestly just something really cool about a priest packing a shotgun blowing minions of cosmic terror straight to hell.
I love you too.
Add this one to the list of early access games that I'm going to be eagerly anticipating updates for, and I'm going to give Forgive Me Father an 8.5 out of 10 so far. Well kids, the time has finally come to sit down and talk some more about Forgive Me Father, the ambitious indie FPS title developed by Polish studio Bite Barrel, which released into early access last year. The game's had a few updates between now and then, adding a couple of sneak peek levels as well as an endless mode, but recently the game came out of early access and into full release, not only updating the game's artwork and graphics overall, but adding brand new cutscenes and an entirely new character to play as along with their own unique skill tree. So we have quite a bit of meat to bite down into for the full release. So to recap, in the early access version you played as an unnamed priest summoned back to his old hometown of Pestisville by his cousin Lewis, talking about some mysterious misfortune that had befallen the town. But upon arriving, the priest didn't find cousin Lewis at all. Instead, a town swarming with zombies and other twisted nightmares, forcing the priest to go against his own convictions and pick up a revolver to dole out some old-fashioned, Old Testament violence in order to find cousin Lewis at the heart of this terror. With the full release, the setup remains the same, except now at the start you can choose between playing as the priest or as the new character, the journalist. I have to admit, I was cautious about the idea of a second playable character being added into the game, as the experience playing as a conflicted priest amongst eldritch horrors is just too good a setup. But the journalist is not only a well-conceived and implemented character, but a welcome addition as well. Helping out with this is the fact that the story and the cutscenes play out exactly the same way for both characters regardless of who you choose. No matter what, you're entering Pestisville to find your cousin Lewis, and instead you find zombies. What follows story-wise is your character then journeying through the rest of the town in search of Lewis and the truth of what happened to Pestisville, eventually moving onward to such locations as a neighboring swamp, a hillside cemetery, an underground science lab, Arctic cult gatherings, and even the abyssal void itself. Battling zombies slowly but surely becomes encounters with Lovecraftian monsters, cultic priests, cosmic terrors, and even eldritch gods seep into the path of your character, all of which complicate the playing field in unique ways and force the player to not only stay moving, but prioritize specific enemies first and foremost, lest you find yourself on the wrong end of a shape-shifting monster bearing down hard on your ass. One of the things I really enjoyed about the story is that it leaves it up to the player to be as involved as they want in the unfolding of the overall plot. There are bits of story scattered throughout the levels, which if you want a 100% a map, you do have to find all of them, but it isn't necessary to pour through each of the story items found as you go. The newly added cutscenes between episodes fill the player in on the main plot points, detailing certain revelations as we go, so you never have to worry at any point about missing any key bits of story if you fly through a mission without stopping to grab every little item. Which is absolutely refreshing, because even though I like to make sure I find all the details of story and plot when I play games like these, having the option to just blow through if you don't care to find everything is great for players who only want to get the main gist of the tale. And what a fucking tale this is, kids. I am a big fan of Lovecraft and Lovecraftian tales, despite, him being a huge fucking racist. And this particular tale of Lovecraftian madness is an absolute doozy. As mentioned already, the plot plays out the same way for both characters, the priest and the journalist. So no matter how you decide to go into it, you're going to see the same cutscenes and narration, just with different character models swapped out. But even though the cutscenes and writing and the ending are the same no matter who you play as, the way it affects each character differs based on in-game dialogue that matches their individual personalities. So for example, the priest is a humble man of God who walks into this monster-filled town fearful and hesitant to violence. He asks God to forgive him for killing what used to be humans and sometimes notes that he doesn't want to keep going. Meanwhile, the journalist is accustomed to war and combat and immediately sinks her teeth into the idea of plowing through the hordes to find her cousin, taunting the creatures out loud and seething with anger. Both characters have unique dialogue that they say throughout the game, which gives us insight into their mindsets as they progress, detailing in different ways the individual spirals into madness. The priest's stalwart faith and pacifism slowly erode as he comes face to face with unholy nightmares, and the journalist's hardened attitude towards war and the use of violence makes her more susceptible to falling into the cruelty of insanity. By the end of the game, both characters will have changed irreparably, and my God, if that final cutscene isn't a fucking wallop no matter which character you play as. Cosmic horror never ends well for anyone, kids, and this tale, without any spoilers whatsoever, masterfully follows that ideal and left my jaw hanging open in shock and disbelief. What helps develop the characters' personalities by simply existing are the skill trees in the game. Now, as you gun down Cthulhu's minions, you'll earn experience points, and with each level up, you'll have the ability to upgrade weapons, health, and character-specific skills found in the game. The priest is built around a more cautious, defensive playstyle, with abilities that grant temporary invincibility, health boosts, and unlimited ammo. Meanwhile, the hardened journalist is designed with more aggressive gameplay in mind, and can regain health by killing enemies with a mystical sword, cause massive amounts of damage with a voodoo doll, or slow down time around her by smoking cigarettes. I don't think that's nicotine in those smokes, miss. The skill tree is something that was present in the early access content, but has been expanded upon significantly for the final release. It's surprisingly deep, offering a lot of options for a game that only runs somewhere in the realm of 7 to 8 hours, and while you'll be able to get through a bit of the tree, you won't be able to get everything in one playthrough. Weapon upgrades branch off, forcing you to consider what you value more in your guns and gameplay, because once you choose a branch, you don't get to respec. For example, you start off with a simple revolver, accurate, fires at a decent rate, and does good damage, but you can choose to upgrade to either dual revolvers or a German pistol. Dual revolvers fire faster and hit just as hard, but are less accurate. Meanwhile, the German pistol also fires faster, is just as accurate as a base revolver, but does less damage per bullet. Other weapons ask the player to choose between traditional FPS weaponry and more outlandish, Lovecraftian, and sci-fi options. The Tommy gun can be upgraded to either a stronger, heftier version of the Tommy gun that fires faster, or it can be turned into a Tesla gun, which relies on energy ammunition instead of bullets, and absolutely shreds enemy health. But the heftier Tommy is a hit scan, where the Tesla gun is a projectile energy beam. One of the biggest differences in gameplay style for upgrades is the shotgun, which starts out as a standard issue double barrel, but can be upgraded to a really fucking devastating super shotgun, which fires more pellets and genuinely gives the Doom 2 super shotgun a run for its money. And yet, on the flip side, the double barrel can be transformed into a writhing mass of tentacles, which fires a spread of bouncing bullets, and then upgraded again from that into a nightmarish pump action which looks like a razor-finned fish that fires even more bullets and hits twice as hard. At first I was like, nah, I don't need a bouncy bullet shotgun. I want a supersized double barrel shotty with a side of fries and a large order of jibs. But when I sat down to play through as the journalist, I gave the Eldritch shotgun a try, and let me tell you kids, it is just as wonderfully depraved as the super shotgun is. Forgive Me Father does a lot of things right, but it absolutely 110% nails each version of the shotgun it provides. And sweet mother of mercy, does that elevate this title a little extra in my book. Player choice is paramount in Forgive Me Father, offering up a multitude of ways for individual players to decide for themselves how to progress through the skill tree and match their preferred playstyle to set upgrades, and to the character they've chosen to play as. The downside to this is, depending on how you spend your skill points, you might not see very much progress through the skill tree your first time through. My advice for you kids is to immediately sink skill points into the bonus XP stat, making it so you earn more experience faster. You max that out first, and the next thing you know, you'll be hitting levels and gaining upgrades a lot easier and a lot quicker than you would if you didn't. Trust me. For this review, I played through the entire game as the priest and about halfway through as the journalist just to get a sense of skill trees that I didn't choose. And where I ended my game at level 13 with the priest, by the halfway mark with the journalist, I was already level 11 just from maxing out the bonus XP stat. So yeah, do yourself a favor. Meanwhile, gameplay and gunplay are excellent. Each of the unique skills that the two characters have are accessed by gaining madness, which accrues whenever you're surrounded by, well, madness-inducing events and monsters. The higher your madness meter, the more your vision starts to darken and blur, making it harder to see, but the payoff is that you deal more damage and take less damage as you do so. Meanwhile, as the madness meter gets higher, all the points in that meter go towards refilling your skills, which then stack up to a certain number of uses. If you press a hotkey, use the skill, wait for it to recharge, and if you have another use stacked up, you can hit it again. Effective, simple, and also upgradable to be either more potent or to last longer. There's a dick joke somewhere in there that I just can't think of. Each of the weapons is fun to use and effective, and you'll quickly figure out the trade-offs for using one versus another. For example, there's two automatic rifles in the game, the Submachine Gun and the Tommy Gun. A Submachine Gun is far more accurate and arguably does more damage, but is a burst fire weapon. The Tommy Gun has more recoil and slightly less of a punch, but is fully automatic and excellent for spray and pray situations. editions. The two new weapons for the full release are the Energy Rifle and the aptly titled Thundernomicon, which is essentially a Cthulhu BFG. The Energy Rifle is standard issue plasma gun style goodness, and the Thundernomicon launches big fucking energy blasts that devastate crowds. A bonus to the Thundernomicon is that, being such an alien eldritch thing, it adds to the madness meter simply from using it, which can help immensely in tight spots when you need to get your skills back up. Every weapon in the game remains useful from start to finish, which I was certainly impressed by. Rarely do I get down to the end game of an FPS title and still utilize the pistols, but here, it's almost necessary to know when to use and keep every weapon ready in rotation. This is because the enemy roster is so varied and distinct that no one weapon is going to be more useful than the others when it comes down to blazing a path forward. Sometimes you'll find yourself dealing with enemies that trundle slowly towards you, others zip forward far too fast for comfort, and others duck and dodge and weave around cover just to snipe you from a distance. If I tried to go down the list of various enemies and their individual traits, we would be here all day. Some of them are real fucking annoying to handle, but never felt unfair, which is what we're always hoping for in a first-person shooter. Give me the pain, but don't make it frustrating. That's not to say that you'll never get frustrated playing this game, because, Christ, when you're playing on harder difficulties, Forgive Me Father does not skimp on the punishment. There are constant waves of enemies which hit hard, and should you stand still for too long, you'll be dead within seconds. Boss encounters await at the end of each of the 5 episodes, requiring careful attention to the surrounding areas as well as boss attack patterns, which can and will lead to multiple deaths and attempts before finally landing on the right rhythm to bring it all down to a close. Even though I grit my teeth and agonize over each shitty death during stressful, complex boss encounters like what's in this game, if I feel accomplished and rewarded at the end of it, then I am satisfied. And these boss fights are very, very satisfying to complete. Now, in my early access review, I mentioned that games trying to emulate the sense of being in a living, breathing comic book rarely feel like they actually succeed without feeling like a tryhard or a secondhand experience. But Forgive Me Father absolutely nails his vibe so effortlessly that it almost masks the sheer amount of effort it takes to pull off visuals and atmosphere like this. Graphically, the game is chock full of modern effects like lighting, particle effects, bloom, screen filter, so many different layers that all of them should feel like a 7-layer dip made out of jello and avocado and birdseed. But there is such a delicate expertise to the way Byte Barrel utilizes all of the post-processing to complement the comic book artwork. And by artwork, I mean highly detailed stylistic artwork. The effects in this game never cease to impress. The captions for every headshot and explosion never got old, and every environment and design feels so lucid and vivid and distinct. To feel like a nightmare is one thing, to embody a nightmare is another, but to transport the player to said nightmare through the lens of an old 40s comic magazine is something else entirely. I don't need to overstate the obvious considering you're watching footage of this game as I'm saying this out loud, but Forgive Me Father never, ever, not once, not one time, ever stuttered or hitched or gave me any performance issues and still managed to look this gloriously ugly and lurid. Easily a nominee for the best looking shooter of the year. Meanwhile, all of this is thoroughly enhanced by the excellent soundtrack by composer Tim Fialka, who swerves between ominous synth layers and deep, crunchy guitars. I was surprised at how much I genuinely enjoyed the music in this game, all things considered, because usually when it comes to horror titles, even more action-oriented ones, I prefer more atmospheric music to hype up the tension rather than heavy metal rip-and-tear soundscapes. But Tim Fialka's work is impressive at accomplishing both in spades, and when appropriate to the game is necessary. What helps is the adaptive soundtrack rising and falling and shifting scores on the fly from combat to exploration nearly seamlessly, which is yet another kudos I have to give to this game. As I ladle all of this praise onto the game, I do need to remember to vent a couple of mild criticisms about the game. Firstly, and this is a strictly personal thing, the run cycle is just a little too fast for my own taste. I'm starting to get used to all of these new indie shooters that have auto run on by default without the option to hold shift to run, but Forgive Me Father's controls feel just a little too touchy even compared to other titles. At times I found myself gently tapping the WASD keys just to move a slight inch in order to line up with objects I wanted to interact with, which was a mild pain, but only the most annoying when outside of combat. During combat, the controls feel very fluid and responsive, which I'm grateful for because otherwise this wouldn't have been fun to play. And while there weren't any overt bugs that I discovered during gameplay, there were a couple of instances where I wanted to load a checkpoint save, but instead the game would load me up at a completely different spot in the map I was currently on, even though it did save my progress and the enemies I had killed already. The number of times this happened, I can count on one hand. But when a game's save system is entirely dependent on saving at specific checkpoints, and then loading back to said specific checkpoints to continue onwards, whenever that glitches, it can be a little heart-stopping at times. Thankfully, as I mentioned, it never erased or negated any progress I made, it just loaded me in a different spot for some weird reason. Where the first 4 episodes of the game are fairly tight and well-designed, the final episode in the Eldritch Void gets a little frustrating. There's fewer levels in the episode than the rest of the game, this being due to each level being insanely huge, filled to the brim with monsters that swarm at you from every angle as a true final test of your resolve. And while overall I don't dislike the 5th chapter, because of the bigger levels and the spacing and the checkpoints and the sheer volume of creatures you have to face, the game does start to bog down just a little bit here. Add in some really frustrating platforming puzzles during one section and it just... Fortunately, balancing this out, there are some really good set pieces during the 5th episode, as well as the most visually astounding and weird environments in the whole of the game. And this is less of a criticism and more of an awareness, the voice acting in the game for both of the characters can feel a little off at times. Now, this never bothered me, but I could see how it would fall flat for some people. Honestly, it worked for the most part because Lovecraftian stories generally revolve around people acting kind of off-putting in general, and also since I love games that come from Polish studios, a lot of the time the voice acting in those games can be a little stilted and slightly unnatural. So I didn't have a problem with the voice acting in Forgive Me Father whatsoever. In fact, I embraced it, but some players might not have the same experience. Forgive Me Father is a tense, tight, extraordinarily well-crafted title that has come far from its already impressive early access debut. Adding in polished artwork and graphics, an entirely new character with different gameplay and skills, and full cutscenes, Forgive Me Father has established itself as a champion of a game with impressive graphics, gameplay, story, soundtrack, and more. This game scratched so many itches for me, from Lovecraftian to sci-fi horror to boomer shooter extravaganza. I absolutely cannot recommend this game enough, and Forgive Me Father gets a 9.5 out of 10. Kids, this is the first game that I've done both an early access review for and also a full release review, so I kind of feel a little accomplished here. My channel has grown way more than I thought it would after starting it a year and a half ago, and I've got all of you watching to thank for it. If you feel like helping me to continue to grow, there's a link for my Patreon in the description below. Buying games ain't cheap, kids, let me tell you. And if you want to join in on some of the tomfoolery of the Ranger Station Discord, I've got a link for that as well. Now, sit up straight, stretch your jaw because you've been clenching your teeth again, and make sure you stay hydrated today, kids, and I'll see you next time.